Hello there, I'm Barbara Sarah, standing in for Richard Gisbert. Welcome to the Listening Post. This week, Iran, where there's a tug of war for control of the internet. A Cambodian radio journalist takes on the government and loses. The alternative media network that's reporting the story of Kashmir.
Sponsored media who hide this homicide.
And what if you had to lip read the politicians on TV?
I made a small chimp smoke cardboard cinnamon.
They'd probably make more sense. That's our web video of the week. Last week, when Iran blocked Google for the second time this year, it sent ripples through the country's online community, a rising concern that the Persian firewall is becoming even stronger. But then, just as suddenly as it had been disconnected, Google came back online. For those who track how Tehran deals with the flow of information within the country, the Google incident was a hint at a larger strategy. A strategy to control who is saying what to whom in Iran. Already there are ambitions to expand the national intranet, which connects government agencies and offices, to include an Iranian web search and email service. And with presidential elections coming up in just 9 months, it isn't any surprise that the mechanisms of control are getting tougher. Neither Iran's citizens nor its government have forgotten the role that the internet played in post-election protests back in 2009. Our starting point this week is Iranian cyberspace, where the fight for political power is already underway. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips reports.
The Iranian government is probably one of the most perfectly capable censorship regimes on the internet, short of China.
One thing that the Iranian government has managed to do is to successfully create the sphere of fear. The government is watching you.
Cybersecurity is becoming more and more important, not only for Iranian government, but for Iranian users and Iranian activists.
To understand Iran and the internet today, it's key to understand what happened in 2009. For more than 7 months, thousands protested what they called the hijacking of the presidential election. Armed with digital cameras and internet-enabled phones, they Facebooked, tweeted and YouTubed to the world. It was the biggest unrest in Iran since the 1979 revolution, and the effects are evident in Iran's cyber policies today.
There are two sort of a school of thoughts, or say camps within the Iranian state. One camp is arguing to restrict the flow of information. There is a kind of another sort of a camp that they believe that you have to harness the power of internet. After what happened in 2009 with the presidential election inside Iran, the security side, the security sort of a camp, they have been having the upper hand. They have been able to impose their views of the policies in Iran.
The Iranian state dominates the country's media. The government owns and controls all local radio and TV outlets. There are a number of privately owned print publications, but they walk a fine editorial line. On September 26th, the reformist Shark newspaper was shut down and its managing editor jailed for publishing a cartoon deemed disrespectful to soldiers of the 1980s Iran-Iraq war. Keeping a leash on the mainstream media has never been the challenge. It's the internet that's hard to control.
The Iranian government always had a way to control domestic media. And it is frustrating for them, especially in the age of internet, more and more, that there are independent media outside Iran, which not only can access information inside Iran, but also can transmit back to Iran and give the information to Iranian people. As an example, I can give you BBC Persia. We were never allowed to have a reporter inside Iran. But in many occasions, we have been the first news organization who reported the developments inside Iran. And more by relying on social media, by relying on the contributions of users, we have been able to cover a country without being physically there.
The government's paranoia about cybersecurity isn't entirely unfounded. In June last year, a powerful computer virus developed by American and Israeli intelligence services hit Iran's nuclear facilities in Natanz. The attack set alarm bells ringing and added weight to the argument for a closed-off national intranet. But disconnecting from the World Wide Web is easier said than done, especially when it means cutting off access to one of Iran's most frequently used websites, Google.
Google, in some way, represents the chief adversary of the Iranian government's campaign against a free flow of information over the internet. What the Iranian government wants to do more and more is bring the products that people use on a daily basis into the country. It's the China model. It's this idea that you don't need to have heavy filtering at international gateways if these services are located inside of your country. And so what Google represents is this externality that they can't control. And what they've tried to make clear over and over again is that Google and Gmail are not something that you're always going to have access to. If you choose to use external services, you should expect that that you are going to lose your email for weeks at a time.
That's where the anti-firewall software comes in. Iranians have now become adept at working their way around the online censors.
The paradox of restrictions in Iran is it's very widespread. If it was focused on political websites or news sources, I guess the government would be more successful. But because the restrictions are very widespread, many websites that people use for their day-to-day communications, like email, webcam communications, social networks and social platforms are restricted. Because of that, a large number of people are affected. And those people who are affected will be inclined to find a solution to go past the blocking, and in the same way, when they learn how to access Facebook, how to access YouTube for their personal use, they will find a way to access news websites.
There are two different tools that people are using to circumvent the filtering. One set of tools are provided by organizations outside Iran, Tor, Siphon, Your Freedom, UltraSurf. These are the popular tools both in Iran and China. And also there's another category of the tools that they are not meant to be circumvention tools, but they are used as circumvention tools, like the VPN, virtual private networks. They are mostly used by businesses to provide connectivity between the different offices around the world. But Iranians and also other users in other countries are using the VPNs as a way to bypass the filtering. The one tricky thing about all of these tools is that they rely on encrypted traffic to function. And one thing the Iranian government has done before, and they might do it again, is to just shut down the encrypted traffic. And that means that all of these circumvention tools will stop working.
It's a cat and mouse game, and the government is wising up. Presidential elections are scheduled for June 2013, and Iran's web community has a tough task at hand. They need to keep one step ahead of a state determined to win the information battle.
Our Global Village voices now on the Persian firewall.
It is important to realize that the media landscape in Iran is essentially under severe limitation from establishment, not only the regular media, the conventional media, but also the new media. Filtering essentially is sort of the less important challenge in some extent, because when a source is filtered, then people can use anti-filtering and filtering circumvention tools and get access to the content. What is more challenging is the threat of filtering. So what happens is the owner of a website, of a blog, practices self-censorship in order to avoid to be filtered.
Iranians have been blogging and using the internet for more than 20 years now, and have been blocked and controlled by their government in that use for almost as long. Of course, this has created a situation where you have people who know how to get around, a kind of nation of hackers and crackers who know how to get around filters and the controls that the government tries to put on them.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. A video clip of missing American journalist Austin Tice has surfaced in Syria, but all is not what it seems to be on screen. The brief clip shows Tice being held by a group of men in an unidentified location. The journalist went missing on August 13th while reporting on the Syrian civil war from Damascus, and the U.S. State Department has said that it believes he's being held by the Syrian government. The video, however, however, points the finger at rebels, but not very convincingly. Analysts say the footage doesn't look authentic. One giveaway is the curious dressing style of the captors. This is the first time Syrian rebels have been seen wearing Afghan clothes. Also, the video was posted to an unknown YouTube channel rather than on a rebel website or online forum. Joseph Holliday, a researcher with the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War, said, "My gut instinct is that regime security guys dressed up like a bunch of wahoos and dragged Austin Tice around and released the video to scare the US and others about the danger of al-Qaeda extremists in Syria. It would fit their narrative perfectly." One of Cambodia's most prominent radio journalists and vocal critic of the government has been sentenced to 20 years in jail on charges of plotting against the state. Mam Sonondo's Radio Beehive is one of just a few outlets in Cambodia covering human rights abuses and the widening farmland repossessions taking place across the country. Sonando was arrested back in July after Prime Minister Hun Sen accused him in a speech of inciting riots following land disputes. At a hearing in a Cambodian court, the judge said Sonando had provoked villagers in the eastern Kreti province to demand independence. The radio owner was charged a fine of 10 million Cambodian riel. That's roughly $2,500 in addition to his 20-year jail sentence. This is the third time that Mam Sonando is being jailed. In both previous cases, Radio Beehive broadcasts deemed injurious to the government were at issue. Cambodia watchers say that this case is part of a larger crackdown against journalists critical of the government and big business. Only last month, environmental journalist Hang Serey Udum, who wrote about illegal logging at the Vorakchun Khmer Daily, was found murdered in the trunk of his car in northeast Cambodia. Italy has some of the toughest libel laws in the European Union, and the recent sentencing of a newspaper editor has led to renewed calls for reform. Alessandro Sallusti, the editor of one of Italy's largest daily newspapers, Il Giornale, which is owned by the Berlusconi family, has been sentenced to 14 months in jail on charges of libel. The case dates back to 2007, when Sallusti was editor of another newspaper, Libero, and published an anonymous article that called for the judge in a controversial abortion case to be put to death. Italy's Supreme Court upheld a lower court's ruling that Sallusti was legally responsible for that article. It has given him 30 days to decide whether he would rather accept community service instead of the prison term. Sallusti, however, has announced that he will go to prison. His paper, Il Giornale, has begun a front-page countdown to the start of his jail term. While the 2007 article at the center of this case has been widely criticized for gross factual errors and its inflammatory tone, the sentencing of Sallusti has provoked outrage. An editorial in the left-leaning Italian daily La Repubblica called the sentence disproportionate and a sinister intimidation of the press. There's a new cybercrime law in the Philippines. The government says it targets identity theft, cybersex, and online fraud. Filipino web users say it targets their online speech. The Cybercrime Prevention Act was given the president's sign-off despite 8 petitions to the Filipino Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of the legislation. Online activists blanked out their Twitter and Facebook profile photos in protest. The law makes libel a cybercrime, punishable by up to 12 years in jail. It also allows the government to close down websites and monitor online activities, such as email or messaging, without a warrant. Brad Adams, Asia Director for the US-based Human Rights Watch, said the cybercrime law needs to be repealed or replaced. It violates Filipinos' rights to free expression, and it is wholly incompatible with the Philippine government's obligations under international law. The dispute between India and Pakistan over Kashmir has been a flashpoint on the subcontinent since 1947. There are more than 500,000 troops positioned on the Indian side alone. But you don't hear that much about it, and that's how the Indian authorities like it. Local reporters work under a strict curfew. Internet access is sporadic. Even text messaging services in the Kashmir Valley are frequently cut off by the powers that be. What has resulted, journalistically speaking, is a government-led narrative that's rarely contested in mainstream media outlets. But that started to change in 2010, when thousands of Kashmiris took to the streets and a host of new online voices were heard for the first time. In the 2 years since, Kashmiri bloggers, filmmakers and authors have taken their stories to web audiences in India, Pakistan and the world. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the rise of the Kashmiri Alternative Media Collective.
It was called the Kashmiri Intifada. Thousands of protesters faced off against Indian troops and demanded an end to what they call the military occupation of Kashmir.
There certainly is a curfew in place, only police vehicles, ambulances in sight.
Journalists and camera teams have been intimidated and told to stay home.
There is this massive uprising against Indian rule in Kashmir, and lots of people, mostly young people, are killed on the streets of Kashmir. And at the same time, there are huge curbs on media in Kashmir. Newspapers don't go to press, local TV channels are taken off, there's a ban on text messaging. Even journalists who go to report are beaten up on the streets. So in that environment, a fascinating thing happens. All these young people, without a formal structure, converge, and there's this almost near explosion of new media activity in 2010.
Go to thekashmirwala.com today. The website is an insider's storybook of life in Kashmir. On one of its pages is a daily tracker of the text messaging ban that Indian authorities switch on and off in the valley. The site is run by Fahad Shah, who began the Kashmirwala as a blog and battled patchy internet connections and official clampdowns on reporting to photograph, write and publish all through the demonstrations of 2010.
In 2010, when protests started, I was working with a local newspaper. I was running this blog also. I was just writing the stories which erupted during protests. I was writing some stories on the profile of a person who died, who passed away, who was killed or something. There was a boy in our neighborhood. His name was Umar Koyum Bhatt. He was arrested on Friday afternoon, then taken to a police station. Then he was beaten up. He died. I went to his home and I talked to his family. I talked to the medical officials. I talked to the persons, administration persons, and then I wrote a full story on him.
Fahad Shah and many others like him didn't feel that there was enough coverage of what was happening on the ground.
There are shoot-at-sight orders, remember, in Kashmir for anyone disrupting the peace.
And if there was coverage, it wasn't the kind of coverage they wished to see. So that must have driven somebody like Fahad Shah, because there's suddenly this space for narrativization of what was happening. It becomes very popular because there is a need, there is a hunger from so-called alternate voices from Kashmir.
And the alternative voices are making themselves heard online. Roshan Elahi, who calls himself MC Cash, is a rapper from Kashmir's capital city, Srinagar. He released his first song, I Protest, on YouTube at the height of the 2010 demonstrations.
Sponsored media who hide this homicide.
Elahi's song went viral and became the anthem for many young Kashmiris facing off against Indian troops. Kashmiri news media is moving online as well. The Kashmir Reader, Kashmir Dispatch and the Vox Kashmir reflect a view from the ground that you won't get from mainstream news correspondents reporting from the press enclave in Srinagar. The people clicking onto these sites are from all over the world, but their most significant readerships are to be found in India and Pakistan. The two countries have fought 3 wars over Kashmir, and the mainstream media narratives in both countries have become deeply politicized.
Does going back to pre-1953 for Jammu and Kashmir really emerge as a solution?
On the Indian side, there's a fairly orthodox position on Kashmir, which sees it as an internal matter of India, and Pakistan as the interloper. And of course, this is mirrored in Pakistan, where they believe that this is the unfinished agenda of Pakistan. Historically, that's how Kashmir has been constructed. As a dispute between India and Pakistan, and the mainstream media on both sides has consistently, that's the way it has chosen to represent it.
Mainstream media reports to some certain level, after which they don't move. They just maintain a balance, maybe to maintain peace, but people don't find it good. People find it biased.
This generation of Kashmiris, many of them are fed up with this mediation by Indian and Pakistani media. So somewhere down the line, what happens is, as this generation grows up, they think that we can do this. You know, if somebody can come from Delhi or Bombay and do a cover story on Kashmir, and at some point these people must have thought, we live here and we can write and we can do this. It's also a political statement that we do not accept your version of events here.
They do not accept it, and they are beginning to change it. Kashmir's journalists and writers are not just growing louder and bolder. They've begun to have an impact on how the mainstream media report the Kashmir story.
It's not so much what the news media is carrying, but what it pushes the mainstream media into doing, which has become significant.
Kashmir's generation next has taken to the internet.
Those alternative voices are beginning to color the mainstream discourse. I'm not saying that it has been able to dislodge it, but people are beginning to, for the first time, both in India and Pakistan, concede that there is a third element in this conversation, which is the voice of the Kashmiri people.
These websites and these blogs, they put daily pressure on newspapers because they will publish something on the front page or the inside pages, and then they see the same story covered in these websites in different ways, or with a different perspective, or even a different side to the story. So which means those editors and those journalists are constantly reading these things, and sometimes they have no option but to incorporate what's appearing in alternate media into their journalism and reportage and coverage, which I think is a brilliant thing.
Because it signals that the Kashmiri voice is moving, from graffiti on the streets to websites on the internet, from the fringes of the debate to the center of the discussion, from what they call alternative spaces onto the front pages in the mainstream media.
More Global Village voices now on alternative media from Kashmir.
Journalists in Kashmir have been working through very difficult times. They have come under pressure from different sources. Sometimes a story which doesn't suit the security forces has produced an adverse reaction from them. And sometimes if the story is not in the favor of the separatist fighters, they definitely have come and intimidated the journalists. And yet I may tell you that the journalists in Kashmir, by far and large, have withstood these pressures. As a journalist sees, he writes his copy as he sees it, not as somebody would like him to write his copy or do his report.
In Indian media, they never show the clear picture of the happenings in Kashmir. Let me give you an example. A few years back, when the people of Kashmir were protesting against India, the Indian media portrayed as if all the protesting people were paid mob, which is absolutely untrue.
And finally, there's just 1 month to go before Election Day in the United States, and the Obama and Romney campaigns are saturating the media. With TV debates, political ads, minute-to-minute news updates, you'd be forgiven for wanting to hit mute on your TV remote. And that's where this week's viral video comes in. It's been put together by a Texas-based music producer who's racked up millions of hits online. His video series is called Bad Lip Reading, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Videos that spoof the candidates by dubbing an alternative voice track that syncs with their original lip movements. We think the results are pretty funny. Bad Lip Reading is our web video of the week, and we'll see you next time right here at The Listening Post.
Is that your underwear up there? I'll punch you in the back. I lost my guinea pig. We gotta look for him. Here, Percy. I saw this small chimp smoke cardboard cinnamon. Cray cray. Yo, Mama Karen has a pig ear. It's a pig ear. Go deep. Old people are stinky. Spike their drink. I bought 2 zebras and tamed a parrot named Mr. Future. I'm a hot taco. Squirrel kickers are drunk marionettes. I'd like to get a monkey because I ate Fifi. Yeah, strip party. Oh yeah. I'll butcher a deer every weekday waiting for Poppy. Your mama got a fruit child. We're going to knock you and take tissues out of you. Big, strong Greg. Howard, dumb. I hate you. What? Every soda cannot be free, but I'll chop a squid and mash a pickle and watch you drink it. Dang, no one's happy. Now, if you live in America, you know this next song. It's simple, just tap it in, that's a zinger. And tell me how to poke it on Tuesday. And for you foreigners, that translates as con leche, lucare, lufre, le prasba farnice, pergeci, lazzo sofabaci. Aye.